The eighth-place Seattle Storm went 3-7 in its last 10 games. Where does the team stand with 3 weeks left in the regular season as it competes for a playoff spot? Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Wednesday. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today we'll chat all about what happened around the WNBA last night, where the Storm stand with about 3 weeks left in the regular season, the Super Ed statue unveiling, and what's coming up for Seattle as the regular season comes to an end very soon. Joining me today is the Next Seattle Storm beat reporter, Bella Munson. So Bella, before we dive into the Seattle Storm, let's catch up on some of the 5 games from last night, starting with Jen Hatfield in DC, and then we'll eventually come back around to the Chicago-Seattle game.
Hello, Locked On Women's Basketball. This is Jen Hatfield, your Washington Mystics beat reporter at The Next. Entering Tuesday, the Mystics were just a half game out of 8th place for the final playoff spot, but they came in tonight and dropped an 80-69 decision to the last place Connecticut Sun here at home. Mystics head coach Sydney Johnson said his team was off their game tonight, but put the blame on himself, telling reporters post-game, "I can help our team more." This was also the first game back in DC for forward Aaliyah Edwards, who was traded to the Sun on August 7th. She finished with 8 points and 4 rebounds in just over 16 minutes. Her former teammate, Mystics center Shakira Austin, said she hopes to guard Edwards when these teams play again on Thursday so that Austin can block Edwards' shot. This is Jen Hatfield signing off.
And now let's head over across the country to Matthew Walter, who was at the Phoenix Mercury Golden State Valkyries game last night.
In a game where they were heavily shorthanded, the Golden State Valkyries had a 12-point halftime lead, but ran out of gas in the second half and fell 98-91 on Tuesday night to the Phoenix Mercury at the Chase Center. I'm Matthew Walter, a beat reporter for The Next, covering the Valkyries and a host of Locked On Women's Basketball. Right before the game, Golden State announced they would be without both starting guards Tiffany Hayes and Cecilia Zandalicini, limiting Golden State to just 8 players. The 8 that were available were able to blitz Phoenix early, shooting 51% en route to a 59-point first half and a 12-point lead at the break. However, the second half was a whole different story, with Phoenix dominating in the paint and on the glass. Golden State led the rebounding battle by 6 at the half, but ended up losing it by 11 while giving up 24 points in the paint in the second half. Valkyries guard Veronica Burton said after the game that there was an element of difficulty from getting fatigued or playing through foul trouble with limited numbers, but she was proud of their fight tonight and everyone for stepping up. Golden State will play Phoenix again on Friday.
Now let's continue our cross-country journey and end up kind of somewhere in the middle with Hope Perry, who covers the Chicago Sky.
Locked on Women's Basketball. Tonight, the Seattle Storm defeated the Chicago Sky 94-88. The Chicago Sky scored 38 points in the fourth quarter, which is their highest scoring quarter of the season, and just 4 points off the franchise record of 42. Angel Reese returned from a couple of weeks out due to a back injury and scored 19 points. Coach Tyler Marsh said in the postgame that the energy that Reese brings is palpable to the team as a whole, and said that her versatility and the work that she's putting in towards becoming an all-around player has really helped the Sky. Be sure to check out the rest of our coverage from The Next and Locked On Women's Basketball.
Okay, so now that we've heard from everyone across the country, why don't we dive in more to that Seattle Storm Chicago Sky game? I know you weren't there in Chicago for it, Bella, but what were some of your takeaways from the game?
Yeah, I'm not sure we learned anything drastically new in the game against Chicago, but I do think it reinforced sort of some themes that I've been, noticing throughout the past couple of weeks. First of all, I think the rebounding is getting better. They out-rebounded a team with Camila Cardoso, Elizabeth Williams, and Angel Reese. Obviously, Reese is still just returning from a decent amount of time sidelined with injury, but I still think it's significant that they were able to out-rebound them because early in the season they were getting kind of regularly out-rebounded by teams by double digits. So recently, even in games where they have been out-rebounded, they've gotten out-rebounded by 5 or 3 or 2 instead of 10 or 11 or 15. And that was a big problem for them early on. So I think this game sort of reinforced that that is getting better, and it's something that they have talked about a lot. I also think it reinforced the fact that they need to stay focused and do all the little things right for a full 40 minutes. Obviously, like the fourth quarter, as Hope mentioned, Chicago was able to score 38 points. The Storm had a big lead, and they really let Chicago come back into it. They were outscored 38 to 28. Obviously, 28 for the Storm themselves is still a pretty good quarter. And some of that was Chicago's effort, but some of it was unforced turnovers, mistakes that you really can't make in late in a game, and especially not in a close game. So luckily, they had built a big enough lead that they were okay, but the final score was 94 to 88, and they had like a 20-point lead at one point. And with the way results have gone recently, it was much closer and more stressful than I think fans would have liked.
Yeah, definitely. I was planning for this podcast and looked up and went, oh, that's a little bit different than the last time I looked up. So, with all of that in mind, we'll get more into this in our next segment, but what does it mean for the team to get back in the win column? I know they won a game recently, but lost their last game and are looking to kind of right the ship and return to their winning ways ahead of that playoff push with the playoffs coming up in just a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that it is a win, straight up. They needed to get a win in the win column to give themselves a little bit of space from the Mystics and from LA. Their end goal is to make the playoffs, plain and simple. Whether, would they love to host playoffs? Absolutely. But the priority is making the playoffs. And to do that, they need to win games. So I'm not sure how much the win does for confidence. I think it always helps, to score 94 points, get another good performance out of Dominique Malonga, get another good performance out of Skylar Diggins. Nneka Ogwumike has been stellar all season. I think, continuing to get sort of good stuff out of everybody, it feels good to win. Those things can build confidence. At the same time, it's a team that you should beat. It's a game that you should win. It's a game you need to win. So I think it's incredibly important that they won, but I don't know how much it does for their confidence, considering how many games they had lost, and especially given the way that the game ended. Had it ended on a better note, I think their confidence might be a little bit higher. If it had ended as a 20-point blowout, I think their confidence might have been a little higher. They certainly still sounded confident post game. They didn't sound defeated, but it'll be interesting to see how things shake out when they're against top competition again.
And you mentioned the losing streak. Just for anyone catching up on the Storm, can you tell me more about that losing streak?
Yeah, so for 6 games in a row, they lost. Many of those games were at home, which was, I think, the most surprising part, considering what a good crowd is consistently at Climate Pledge and the home support that has been behind them. But they were fighting for a top 4 spot in the standings easily, and suddenly dropped to almost out of the playoff picture because they lost so many games in a row, and all of them pretty much were single-digit losses. Everything was really close. It was very frustrating for the team because it just felt constantly like there was this hump that they couldn't get over for 6 games straight. And the team stayed pretty steadfast during that, and talked about togetherness and staying professional and continuing to work the way they worked. And finally they did get a win over Atlanta in Canada, in what was technically an Atlanta home game, but was really a Storm home game because of the way the crowd leaned just a couple hours north of Seattle. I think that was a really big win for them, just because it ended the streak. And Atlanta's a really good team. They needed a win against a good team, and they needed to get one of those close wins. They're, I believe, 2-9 in close games this year, or single-digit games, and you got to be able to win close games. So it was definitely a tough stretch, but it feels like maybe they're coming out of that now.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll talk about where the Storm stand with 3 weeks left in the season and more. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I'm in the middle of combining finances with my husband, and Monarch makes it simple to review my finances with him. We can both see our budgets, goals, and spending activity all in one place. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Okay, so as I just mentioned, there's about 3 weeks left in the regular season. What do the Storm need to do to finish the season strong? As we've mentioned, the team currently sits in 8th place, last playoff spot. It's won 2 of its last 3 games, but only 3 of its last 10.
Yeah, I mentioned it a bit earlier. After they lost to Phoenix on Sunday, I asked Nneka Ogwumike what the difference maker was in that game. And she said it was all of the little things throughout the game that add up. And when I asked head coach Noelle Quinn what those little things meant to her, the kind of things that came to her mind when she heard that, she had a very specific example about executing on a sideline out of bounds at the end of the third quarter. And I think it is those sorts of things throughout the game that they need to execute on. I go back to when they played Atlanta at home before the Canada game. It was a very close game up until the end of the third quarter, when some mistakes and a hot Ryan Howard ended the game on a 9-0 run thanks to 3 Ryan Howard threes in a row at the end of the third quarter. And suddenly it did not feel like a close game, and Seattle was really struggling to get back into it. And it was, the last 3 points of that was a really bad turnover that shouldn't have happened. And the team has talked about needing to stay focused throughout the entirety of their games through those little things. I think rebounding is one of those sort of little things that they had focused on for a while. And so they want to stay consistent with the little things that they have been doing well, but then they just need to stay focused. I think they've also, talked a lot about, basically after each game, they sort of talked about having learned from that game everything that they need to not do. Every loss was sort of followed by players pretty confident in the fact that they would learn from their mistakes, that they would watch film and they would not make those mistakes again. And also that being in close games sort of made them confident going into more close games. Now, that confused me a little bit because they lost most of the close games, but they do seem to have a sort of comfort in being in those close games, and very rarely, gave up. There were plenty of games where they really pushed it until the last second and really worked to make them even closer games. And so I think to finish the season strong, they need to do exactly what they said they needed to do, which is learn from their mistakes, not make them again, and then stay focused throughout the game. They can't have lapses where they inbound it and throw it to the other team. They can't, be giving up so many and ones. They, need to be consistently good on their defensive coverages, all those sort of things that add up and maybe aren't even, it's not necessarily scoring. They've been scoring pretty well. It's just that everything else needs to be consistent so that they're not, giving teams points that they didn't need to give up. And I think the team knows that. I think they're full of veterans who are sore losers, as they have put it. They all hate to lose. So I think they know exactly what they need to do to finish the season strong. And I am quite certain that they are going to do their best to do that.
Well, one of those people, and this has felt like a lifetime ago, 2 weeks ago, or not even 2 weeks ago, I think it's 2 weeks tomorrow, or 2 weeks ago yesterday, Britney Sykes was traded to Seattle. What has she brought to the team, and how has that kind of changed over the 2 weeks, if it has?
Yeah. One, I think she's just a great personality. She kind of immediately reminded me of Erica Wheeler when we were able to meet her. Just a fun, bubbly person. And, Jen Hatfield had written about this earlier in the season. She sort of has found her voice as a leader a little bit. And something that, teammates and the head coach have praised about Sykes since she arrived in Seattle is that she has continued to be a vocal leader in that team. And it's not a team without plenty of vocal leaders. Obviously, kind of, I think Nneka Ogwumike, Skylar Diggins, and maybe even Erica Wheeler had that. But Gabby Williams and Ezi Magbagor lead in their own way too. And I think having another voice in there doesn't hurt, so that all of the leadership pressure isn't on one player. And she will have different experiences from the other players there. So, first is just, she's brought a veteran voice in the locker room. I think the other thing is, obviously Britney Sykes is a insanely good defender. I think Seattle has a almost like disgusting bounty of riches when it comes to having some of the best defenders in the league, with Ezi Magbagor, Skylar Diggins, Gabby Williams, now Britney Sykes, even Nneka Ogwumike. Like those are some really legendary defenders, honestly. And I think Britney has only added to that. And that's really important because Seattle loves to get a lot of their points by getting steals and getting easy buckets in transition. And Britney Sykes absolutely helps them do that. Another thing that I found interesting that Noelle Quinn talked about was Britney as a really instinctual defender. And so she was able to, in the game against Atlanta in Canada, put Britney Sykes on Ryan Howard because Ryan Howard's a little more unpredictable. And something that Gabby Williams talked about when she did A Touch More Live on Saturday with Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird was that she intensely studies film and takes pride in knowing what players are going to do. So you sort of, I think Britney's nature as an instinctual defender sort of balances out where Gabby is like intensely focused on film and intensely focused on knowing what a player is going to do, because sometimes you do have unpredictable players like Ryan Howard. So if you can put a Britney Sykes on them and slow them down, and Ryan Howard has really scored a lot of points against Seattle recently, even in the past 2 years. So I think she just adds another more length on the defensive end, another kind of defender, just another brilliant defender. She's a terrific rebounder for a guard. She has great length, insane hops. She really gets up there and is really tough, I think. Again, like I had mentioned, rebounding had been an issue for them. Noelle Quinn is always wanting a little bit more rebounding out of her guards. So getting another guard who can rebound is great. And then more offense. Another scorer, another person who can get downhill, who can run in transition, who can do all of the things that the Storm love to do. And in terms of, anything that has changed the longer she spent with the team, I think she scored a lot of points in her first 2 games, and now that she's settling into the team, they're still kind of finding where she should get her shots in what is a relatively crowded offense. I think it's easier on days when maybe Skylar Diggins and Nneka Ogwumike are having off days and they really need her to step up. But on days when you want most of your shots to go to Nneka Ogwumike, where is Britney Sykes getting her shots? Is she only getting them in transition? Is she, really only getting shots when she's creating for herself? I think what they're trying to figure out, and have been doing a relatively good job of figuring out, because she's still, been pretty regularly scoring in double digits, is just sort of when and where she gets her offense within the team.
Awesome. Well, coming up next, we'll continue this conversation, chat about the unveiling of Sue Bird's statue, and what's ahead for the Storm, starting with the Dallas Wings on Friday. So I know this article came out last week, but can you answer the question you posed in the title? Because I think it's a really interesting one, especially as the playoffs loom. Can Dominique Malonga and the Storm bench complete Seattle's title push?
Yeah, I know I wrote a whole thing about it. I don't think I really answered the question. I think for more or less the answer is yes. I think they have a strong enough top of their bench and and capable players on the rest of their bench, even if they're not really used, to support the starters. I also think that something Vegas has proven in past years is that sometimes you really only need one really good sub if your starters are consistent enough. And I think if Seattle starters can be consistent enough, which has been, to be fair, a struggle for them, if those starters, Nneka Ogwumike, Ezi Magbegor, now Britney Sykes, Skylar Diggins, Gabby Williams, if they can be consistent enough, then just getting another 10, 15 points from Dominique Malonga off the bench might be enough. I think Erica Wheeler is still another really great option for them off the bench, especially when she brings on her 3-point shooting. And I think all of Seattle's bench brings very good defense. And obviously that has been a focus of this team last year, this year, since they've been kind of full of really good defenders. It has been a focus of theirs. And so I do think that, where they have had a bench where almost immediately you see the level drop off when the bench comes in, that's not the case this year. You bring Dominique Malonga in and she brings offense, she brings blocks, she is adding to the team. And it's the same thing with Erica Wheeler, Tiffany Mitchell sometimes as well. And so, I honestly, I think it's the starters that need to be consistently stepping up. And that's what is going to determine the title push at this point, because I think the bench has been pretty consistent in what it's been doing. Even if it's not a ton, they've been consistent in it.
And then, we're going to pivot a little bit. We've talked about the Storm's present. We're going to continue to talk about the team's future coming up. But let's take a look back into the past. I am from Connecticut, born and raised, so I am legally obligated to ask you about Sunday when the Sue Bird statue was unveiled. Can you just tell me more about that and get into that whole? I think it was like a weekend celebration.
Yeah, I mean, technically, I think the only thing the Storm did was the stuff on Sunday. But obviously Sue and Megan added a live recording of their podcast in Seattle. It was the biggest one they had done in terms of venue size. And it was, I think, very special. And it's interesting because there have been a lot of Sue celebrations kind of in the past couple of years, right? The jersey retirement, she was awarded the honored with a street named after her last year. Now this, and I think it was really nice to see. It's always, we always know that fans love Sue Bird. Every time she comes on the Jumbotron because she's at a game at Climate Pledge, she gets a standing ovation. And I mean every time. It could be her 4th game in a row, and she's still going to get a standing ovation. But it was really nice to see all the people who showed out for her, like Diana Taurasi was there, Swin Cash, Lauren Jackson flew across the world, and pretty much exclusively comes out for Sue's really big events. Um, and it just, it reinforced how much people love Sue and how much she has impacted not only the team but people around her. I think, I talked to quite a few of her teammates for the story I was writing about it, and some things that stuck out to me were when Asia Wilson and Sammy Whitcomb were separately talking about her, sort of talked about how she made people feel valued and included, like they were important on the team, and always was able to highlight their strengths and make them look good on the court by knowing what their strengths were. And I think that ability to make people feel included and seen is also kind of how she made fans feel in a way that I think is incredibly difficult to do as a singular person sort of speaking out to a very large group, right? She, over the years, made fans feel included in her career, in what the Storm were doing, in, in parts of her life. And a big way that she's done that has been by, what Ezzy Magmagor said was that, Sue lives by the phrase, just be yourself. And by doing that, she encourages other people to be themselves. And so they feel comfortable and they feel seen and heard again. And I just think it's really amazing how she's able to make not only people who are, close to her and play with her like that, but people who don't know her at all. I'm someone who has admired her for many, many years. And obviously I came from the soccer side initially, so I kind of first was in love with Megan Rapinoe. But then having her and Sue stand for so much and be so vocal about what they believed in, and also so visibly gay, honestly, so visibly gay and happy, and just loving everything about life and about each other, made me feel comfortable in who I am and made other people feel comfortable in who they are. And I think the reason she got a statue is not just because she won 4 championships and was a 13-time All-Star and a 5-time gold medalist, but she is all of those things. But really, she made a difference in the city. She made people feel a certain way, and it's that feeling that doesn't go away. Like championships, you can, you're not really going to forget them, but they're fleeting. But like how you make someone feel about themselves and about other people, I think is something that sticks around for a long time. And, the statue is sort of a representation and a continuation of that.
Again, pivoting to back to the future, the Storm's next game is Friday against the Wings. What do you think are some keys to the team's success in that game in particular as they continue to make that playoff push?
Yeah, I think, the Wings now have their own sort of injury struggles that could make things easier for the Storm, could make the Dallas team more determined, fight a little bit harder. There have been a couple times where they have sort of lost to young, scrappy teams, and I think the key will be to not let that happen. And it's the same thing that they've been talking about. It's doing all those little things for 40 minutes, keeping up hustle, effort, and most importantly, focus for the full 40 minutes, and just making sure that they don't let off the gas too soon or not build themselves a big enough lead. Ideally they win by 10, 15, and it's not a super tight game, but obviously, Paige Beckers is really good and she's got some great players around her. And so it's not, they can't take it as an automatic win. They can't take it for granted that they'll win. They have to really show up and show out. And, hopefully they can do that. But it's just a continuation of all the things that they've been needing to do. And I think if they can't, execute those things against teams on the lower end of the table, I have serious concerns about them being able to do it against teams on the higher end of the table. So it is really important, like with Chicago, that although you don't take anything as, a granted win, that they do get this win, and they do get this win that they should get.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Bella, for joining me today. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason. Doug, Matt, and Hayes keep you up to date on contract negotiations, rumors, and everything you need to be the most informed NBA fan. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And make sure to tune back into Locked On Women's Basketball for the rest of the week to hear from Chelsea Late, and on Saturday to hear from our Saturday podcast crew, who's always talking all things WNBA draft.